So welcome back, guys, and thanks for stopping by. If you've ever thought about building a screen door from start to finish, you're in the right place today. Today I'm going to show you everything that I did to build a screen door from start to finish. Now this is the first door that I have ever built, so if I can do it, you can do it too. Let's get started. Alright, so let me show you the first door that I'm replacing. This one is probably anywhere between 30 and 50 years old. I'm not really sure. It's just old, it's very distressed, and it needs quite a bit of work, or it just needs to be replaced. I actually have two doors to build, so this will be the first one. Let me show you the exact dimensions that I want to make this door, because I want to make it an exact replacement of the door that is currently there. I don't want to have to deal with reframing the area around the existing door, so the idea is just to pop off the old door and put the new one in the exact same place. Simple as that. Okay, so let's dive right in and start cutting down the lumber to something more manageable. Initially, I cut each side and rail from an 8-foot piece of pine into rough dimensions, just to get started. Next, I started planing the boards down to the exact thickness of the door that I'm replacing. In this case, each board needed to be exactly 1 1/8 inches thick. This was my first time using a planer, so it took me longer than expected. I kept planing off 1/16 of an inch on one side, measuring the thickness again, flip it over, and see how close I was to my final target. Planing gets tricky when you're working on long pieces of wood, like for the sides of the door, because it's hard to keep everything flat as it's going through the planer. Next, it was on to cut pieces to the exact width needed to match the specifications of the old door. I started out with 2x6 dimension boards. Next, I cut each piece down a bit more with the table saw so that I could get a nice square cut. With 6 joints to make, the last thing you want is a board that isn't square. For the long side pieces, I used a miter saw to make the 90-degree cut. This is not ideal, but my table saw just isn't large enough to make that cut. So the miter saw will have to do in this case. Next, it was on to cutting the ends of the kick plate at the bottom so that they were square. This ended up being one of the more challenging pieces. The board was too wide to cut with a miter saw, and it was too long to cut with a good 90-degree angle with the table saw. So I opted to use the circular saw instead. Then I hit my first setback. After doing all the previous planing and cutting, I let the material sit in the garage for a couple days. When I came back, this is what I found. Let me show you. So this was basically the a 2x6 that I planed down, and you can see how poorly, how tight those rings are. So this was like a very almost a small tree that made this piece of lumber into a 2x6, almost the entire tree. And so as soon as I planed it down, it's trying to breathe again, and it's basically expanding out, and it's just warping. So what I did is I went back and going to try this again. I bought a better quality wood this time from another lumber company outside of one of the big box stores, and you can see on this board the rings are much wider, so this should be a better quality. There's not nearly as many knots compared to this piece of wood. You've got the knots, little things that are just gonna, I think I'll have much better luck with these wider end grains in terms of being able to plane this down and then having a nice flat board even after it sets for a couple more days. So we'll see what happens. Okay, so after buying new material with a better quality rating, I started all over again at step number 1. That's okay though, because I was a lot more comfortable with these steps now that I know what to expect. One thing I did is add an additional feeder plate to both sides of the planer. This helped quite a bit on those longer pieces in terms of keeping the snipe, so you wouldn't have a snipe at the end of the board. And that worked very well. So I redid the table saw cuts, then I redid those miter saw cuts, just like before. Alright, so now it's on to some fun stuff. Mortise and tenon joints. Let's do this. First, I started marking off slots for the mortise and tenon joints. I figured I would start with the mortise side of the joint and then incrementally get there with the tenon side of the joint. I used some double-sided tape to sister on a board so the router would be a little bit more stable. Alright, so the only thing left to do is just plunge right on in. It is so important to take your time with all of this. Obviously from a safety standpoint, but also the further along you get in the project, the more time you would waste if you had to start over again if you mess up. So you don't want to do that. So don't rush anything. Okay, so I'm done with the mortise joints finally. So this is basically the hinge side of the door, and this is going to be the door handle side of the door. So you can see I've got two mortises. They're both 2 inches deep. Just have to clean it out a little bit. This one got a little bit hot when I started off. Probably my fault. These are the two cross braces that are going to go in the middle of the door, and then this long one is, I think it was 11 inches, 10 inches, something like that. But anyway, both these are identical, and you see it's a good 2 inches deep. Now that we've got the mortise side of the joint created, let's talk about the tenon. Okay, so today I'm working on the tenons for the cross members for this door. This is going to be the the left side of the door, or the hinge side of the door. And so you can see I've got the mortise drilled here. It's routed out here. Got another one down there, and then the bottom kick plate on the end. But for today, what I did here is I basically penciled off the parts that I want to take away. And so I've got a 1/2 inch taken away here on this side, a 1/2 inch up here, and then right here is a 5/8 of an inch, and then 5/8 inch here. So the only remaining piece should be right here. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of back my way into it, and I'm going to start taking off a little bit at a time with the dado blades, just to get close to this, because I don't know if how close to 1/2 inch I can get. And so I'm going to try to get it to where this is exactly 1/2 inch, but I want this to be perfectly centered to where the mortise hole is on the piece of wood here, so that when it when I insert it into here, it is perfectly flush on both this side and on the outside. So that's the tricky part. The top rail and the middle rail were much easier to keep square to the blade. The bottom kick plate requires a bit more care to make sure each pass was square. This was due to the width and the length of the board. Adding to the complexity was cutting out the shoulder for the top and bottom tenon for the kick plate. So after a lot of thinking and back and forth and just cautiously going forward, I just settled on using the simple jigsaw to just go in and cut out the corner. I settled for this option because the entirety of the tenon will be hidden inside the mortise, hoping that you wouldn't be able to see any uneven cuts. The rest could be just sanded smooth. Okay, so next it was on to a bit of chisel work to round out the edges of the tenon to fit nice and snug into each mortise joint. So after chiseling down and sanding each tenon for all 6 joints, it was finally time to put all the pieces together. It was pretty good at this point, but I wanted to make sure those seams were flush, so it was back to more sanding until the fit was a bit better. I put the pieces back together, rinse and repeat until you get it right. Anyway, it was time to haul all the pieces to the house to make sure it fit nice and snug. I didn't want to paint and screen the whole thing prematurely and then find out that I needed to trim or sand further after I got down there. So far it's looking pretty good, though a bit more sanding is still going to be needed. Anyway, it was time to start making this look a little bit more polished. I used a router to put a nice edge around the inside of the door just to take off those hard, harsh corners. So far I'm really happy with how this looks. Nothing too fancy, just a nice, simple, clean edge. Okay, so now it's time for the point of no return. We have to glue this sucker together. Okay, let's do it. So I used Titebond glue, the blue one. It's kind of waterproof, but not the green one that's very waterproof. I used 2 bar clamps and 1 Bessey strap clamp. I think I like the Bessey strap clamp from a versatility standpoint, and because it's a little bit smaller to store as well. Okay, so once the glue had set for a while, I used some epoxy resin called G-Flex. I got this from a local store called West Marine. They sell pretty much marine boating supplies. So if it can fix a crack in a boat, I think it would be perfect for to make a door more waterproof. So I use this to fill in some of the holes, some of the ridges, the seams, and anything else I thought that might attract water over time. My goal is to only build this door once and to have it last for ages with proper care. I used a small syringe to get the epoxy into the very small seams to make sure the entire piece was sealed tight. Also, any open knots were filled prior to painting. Finally, it was time to paint the door. Nothing too special here. I don't have a lot of footage of the painting. You guys know how to paint. I think I ended up with 3 coats of paint in the end. This is what it looked like after it was all painted. Okay, so next it was on to screen the door. Now, if you saw my previous video on how to screen the porch, it was essentially the same process, just much smaller. So you lay out the screen, you staple around every edge, every 3 to 4 inches, making sure that there are no wrinkles. It definitely helps here to have a second set of hands for this part. We used the old mesh piece from the old door on the new door. 1, because it was an exact fit already, and 2, because we weren't able to find anything else as durable as what was on the previous door. So we popped that off and put it on the new door and screwed it into place. We used PVC instead of wood lattice for all of the frame molding. We used PVC because it won't rot from all of the wet weather. We used a small brad nailer to attach everything to the door. I should note at this point that all of the hardware on the door is stainless steel. The door, the handle, the lock hook, the spring, the tie backs, the hinges, it's all stainless. Anything else will start to corrode in short order and rust because we are so close to the saltwater environment. Okay, so this is what the finished door looks like. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It's a nice, solid, heavy door that closes even better than the previous door, actually. I feel really good about this door, and I know that it will last for many years to come. So guys, this is my first time creating anything of real significance that I would actually call woodworking. So if you're contemplating woodworking, I would suggest just diving right in and start trying different things. With a bit of research, you'd be surprised at what you can build by just breaking things down into simple, manageable steps. It's not that hard. So let me know in the comments what questions you have. I would love to hear what kind of projects you guys are working on. I know this is a departure from what I typically post videos on, but this is also something that I enjoy doing very much. So guys, if you like this video, hit that subscribe button and share it with your friends. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next video.